Perfect. All right, I am going to get started with my introductions. Again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We have been so looking forward to this, not just in general, but as a wonderful way to kick off a new year with this wonderful new friend that we at NiftyLit have made with Adam. We're just so delighted to love his work and love him as a writer and as a human being. And so we're just delighted to be with you all here tonight. I am Katie Zeigler. I am fortunate enough to be the editor-in-chief of NiftyLit. And on behalf of myself and the rest of the NiftyLit team, please know how delighted we are to share this evening with you. NiftyLit is a relatively new literary journal and entity in the literary world. We were founded in February, March of 2022 under the amazing ideas of our CEO and founder, Joe, and Alex Burtness, who I believe is also on this call. We were founded under the idea of creating a literary and artistic space for writers and artists with an emphasis on emerging writers, with an emphasis on new kinds of voices and writers and artists who may have been underrepresented or underserved or marginalized. And since March, we have signed and paid over 100 contributing writers and artists, and from a pool of more than 700 art and prose submissions. And so we are just so thrilled with the response that we have received about NiftyLit, and it has led us to amazing people and writers, much like Adam. Before I get into how much we adore Adam, I want to make sure that I give our CEO and founder, Joe, a chance just to say hello, if you wouldn't mind, Joe.
Hey everybody, my name's Joe. Thanks for being here. Katie said pretty much everything I would have said anyways, but I want to thank Katie and Adam for putting this together and for sharing your wonderful work with us. You know, she mentioned that we've received over 700 art and prose submissions since we opened for submissions in the spring, around spring of 2022. And Katie reads the bulk of all of those. And so I think it just speaks to Katie's amazing talents, not only as a writer, but also as a reader, to sort through those and to find writing like Adam's, which we're fortunate enough to have here. So thank you for that, Katie, and thank you, Adam, for sharing your work with us as well. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and so then we get to Adam, the best part of the night. Occasionally, the universe sends you a gift. And when Adam's book landed on NiftyLit's doorstep, we knew we had received something incredibly special and incredibly new and innovative and contemplative, not just in the words and the story, but the author himself, who is just as lovely and creative and brilliant as his work is. We are so thrilled to bring Adam's work into the world, and we hope that you will read, purchase, and fall in love with it if you haven't already. Tonight, we're lucky enough to have Adam read portions of his collection, as well as I want to keep this as informal as possible. Adam and I are just going to chat, and we're going to talk about his writing, his life, his inspirations, his future projects, just to get an idea of the person behind this beautiful piece. And so I just want to give a brief summary of his collection before I turn the quote unquote mic over to Adam to read from his piece. 90s Kid Plays Games. Set against the backdrop of the home video game boom of the late 20th century, Adam's 90s Kid Plays Games is as much a portrait of adolescence as it is a Bildungsroman, building towards a heightened sense of identity and understanding. Through a series of interconnected flash fiction, Adam creates parallels both prescient and heartbreaking between growing up and the many obstacles posed by a classic game, weaving together everything from Pac-Man to Medal of Honor into explorations of first friendships, first loves, and the first steps towards adulthood. 90s Kid Plays Games is a brilliant and fascinating work about how to play the game of life. without further ado, I would like to introduce our star of the evening, Adam.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was a wonderful introduction. And please give it up for Katie and Joe. It's been amazing to see what they've been able to do with this project. And I just could not express in words how grateful I am for having this come together, and for Katie's beautiful work on the book, and from the cover art to the glyphs before each section, and for just Joe's knowledge and ability to put this all together. Is I can't express my appreciation enough for what's going on, and for everybody here tonight. I know people get paid to sit in an office and watch boring Zoom meetings every day, so it really means a lot that you'd take your time, your leisure time, and spend it here with me. So I'm extremely grateful for you guys, for all of you, for spending this time with me, and with the collection. And for those of you who have read it and responded, I'm so grateful for it all. So I'm going to read a handful of stories I have here. If you have about 15 or 20 minutes, we shouldn't go beyond that before we start our conversation. So I'm going to get started here. And if you are following along, I've kind of gone, I have not gone chronologically with how the collection's put together. So you might just kind of listen, because I'm not going in any chronological order based on the stories themselves. I've just picked a handful from the story, just to kind of have a thematic sampling of the stories. Junior and Pac-Man. Even when I tried to mimic Dad's every move, the ghosts were still quick to find me. "It's just practice, buddy. You'll get it," he said. He, who had never touched this controller before and would never touch it again. I thought practice had little to do with it, but I thanked him for playing and smiled as he kneaded my shoulder in his reticent, shyly masculine way, and walked out back to mow the lawn, trace that same familiar pattern. From the window, I moved the joystick in sync. We gobbled the grass, every smooth row of victory, for now, haunted no more. Say it. I was in a Walmart lobby the first time I ripped the head off a Taoist monk. Spine dangling from my fist, the gory glory all mine. Even teenagers congratulated me in their alien ways. A victory earned by standing on tiptoes to watch the pattern of the joysticks, the blood-red buttons they popped with an indecent fury. Back home, my Game Boy wasn't going to suffice. Not anymore. My bloodlust needed spurts of color, not these gray drops on my tiny screen. And an arcade was out of the question. A boy my brother went to school with had a basement full of arcades, leftovers from his parents' laundromat. But that seemed a fantasy, like being the cousin of Bruce Wayne, only ever rich adjacent. My own cousin did, however, have a Sega. It was a splurge for my aunt and uncle after he suffered a compound fracture in a pee-wee football game and had to be laid up with the entire bottom half of his body casted. I tried not to sound too eager to visit, a twinge of guilt if I pretended that my excitement didn't have more to do with Mortal Kombat than seeing family. It was a particular type of glory to dispose of your foes in such grotesquerie. The crunch and snap, the viscera leaking on the temple floors. Every now and then, my cousin's physical discomfort would become too much for him to keep quiet about, his pain too real. Since he was still growing at the time, the fracture was particularly troublesome. He knew that he would never play football again. He'll never be completely healed from that, even if his limp were to disappear in old age. His life, even then, had already begun a significantly different path than the one he'd planned, with teams and trophies and trips for pizza to celebrate after a great win or soothe a heartbreaking loss. Here we were, crushing skulls with abandon, piercing throats with harpoons and reeling them in like guppies, as our pawpaw had shown us. All these grand, hyperviolent fantasies we enacted with pure immunity, while out of sight, a little split in the bone decimated a gulf of possibilities. One time, my cousin said to me, as he lay there smiling sweetly at a particularly brutal demise on the screen, how he wished he was like them. What, a ninja? I asked. He laughed, that one still unbreakable thing. Well, that too, he said. But I mean, I wish after all that pain, someone could pick me up again and I'd start the game whole once more. I think about those words often, and how even though he couldn't start again, made new, like all of us, he's continued to play the game, refused to let it finish him. Jackal. It wasn't only on Christmas Eve when we were heroes, but those were the longest treks through the desert. Shoulder to shoulder, we steered our tiny mud and snot-colored tanks to the hostage camps, dodging blips of bullets. Did we ever converse on these nights, beyond tactics and shouts of vitriol or victory? Or did the incomparable thrill of advancement distract us from our individual concerns, the vast unknowability of each other, two brothers 2 years apart? For him, like me, there must have been unspoken pains, volatile hurt we swallowed like little pixelated bombs. Perhaps as years pass, everyone continues to pile an armory of unsaid things in our guts. Silence warns us not to make any sudden movements. Before the weight of our weapons kept us from each other, even on holidays. What joy it was to play all night, safe in the absence of expectations, never tiring of death. Slalom. Thanks to slalom, my parents thought I'd been kidnapped. I blame it on the monotony, the trance-like state the game enacted upon me. I didn't even pause it when the phone rang, didn't hang up the phone even, but let it drop to the ground and walked mindlessly across the yard to the neighbor girl's house, where cookies awaited, offered over the phone by the neighbor girl's mom, who was also technically my neighbor, but adults and childhood crushes lived in my head in completely different realms, and my obsession held sway. Everyone else was merely a relative of my neighbor, the only neighbor that there was room for in my hormonal head. My boy belly was on autopilot. In the kitchen, the neighbor's mom snapped me out of my Nintendo trance into another one with the roundabout curious questions that lull you into thinking there's no ulterior motive. Are girls your age kissing a lot? I know you've seen cigarettes, of course, but joints. Do you know what joints are? Until it's too late and the reconnaissance work is done and she has gathered too many secrets about our adolescent lives. We heard the front door open. I whispered to my neighbor's mom with a finger to my lips that I would hide behind the kitchen counter. Oh, I think the look on their faces, the look on my neighbor's face, frightened at first, but then shaking her head in delight when she sees how sly, how utterly cool I am. The burly boom of the neighbor's father's voice reached us first. Almost time. Almost. He asked his wife with an odd intensity if she had seen me. How perfect, how serendipitous. I leaped from behind the counter now, shouting, "A snake would have bit you." What a line. What a performance. I searched their faces for that perfect look of shock. But no. The wilting in me took place at the moment I met the neighbor's dad's stern gaze. She stood behind him, an odd smirk on her face. She looked and then slowly turned with a wince to stare out the window. I felt her embarrassment for me, a unique, indescribable, compounded humiliation. "Son," the dad said, "you need to get your butt home right now. Your parents are worried to death, and you're here acting foolish." My mother dropped the phone when I entered the living room, another neighbor's panicked voice calling her name. She hugged me tightly, the anger and fear combined in her short reprimand. For a moment, their lives paused. My mom and dad had thought the worst. I tried to play myself into another hypnotic forgetfulness, but I kept tumbling down the mountain, never finding another good rhythm. Her face floated before me with that glint of pity. If only I could disappear, I thought. How much better to be lost. Medal of Honor. My mom's kitchen table always looked like a disaster zone after they had grabbed the snacks, sliced the pound cake, and sloshed sweet tea into dented squirt bottles, their tips gnawed to pebbled stumps. In practices and study halls, and now here at my house pregame, the closest place to the school gym, we found haven with a great mom, good food, and a PlayStation. It was in my room where things really got crowded. Gargantuan team members squeezed onto my bed, the two rotating gamers in chairs in front of the TV. The course map in the top corner had made it too easy to track your opponent, so we taped my fresh new driver's license over it. The danger now of the unseen at the end of every valley, spectators giddy for the kill. No basketball game would be more exciting than this that day, any of those days. Those of us stuck on the bench would talk about the battles. Players on the court would become tactical points only, soldiers in the virtual battlefield. They left me for college next season. A successful season by all external accounts, an undefeated record, an MVP and all conference trophy to place beside my broken CD jewels and empty Mentos wrappers lying wrinkled like snakeskin on my dresser. But the kitchen table was always clean, and the steps never creaked, only ever supporting the weight of one. Without my faithful platoon, who was I? And where were they out there in the world? Sometimes I have a certain sense of anticipation. Turning the corner on a darkening street, I wait with a quickened heart. Maybe they are searching for me too. Our map is, after all, much larger than it used to be. It might take some time. Best to stop counting decades. I hope one day we'll find one another and, in some small way, they'll still want to play again. Need for Speed, Part 2. Sometimes the only thing you have to hang on to is a tight corner. The days and nights are uncertain concepts, always racing forward or away from them, all to end up at this cobbled together rental in your hometown on a road you never knew existed. Aspects of your current situation are almost fascinating in their contrast with childhood predictions. The fact that you spend your days in a security booth in an abandoned parking lot for $10 an hour and have not dated anyone in over half a decade, that might have come as a slight shock to your younger self. You're back here again, in that town you knew you'd only ever see as a dissolving image in your Honda's rear view. Some things, though, you wouldn't have doubted for a moment in that shimmering, hopeful youth. You now live with your best friend. Every night or day is a party. You basically get paid to read. In the blurry montage of it all, the two of you sit in front of a screen larger than anything you could have imagined owning and race in circles together. If that's all you knew, you would have believed it all worked out in the end, despite those creeping fears that often kept you up past bedtime about a dark life filled with sadness. Not here. No, never here. Kendall Cart Kafka. It was my final winter on the coast, and I spent my days spinning out of control. I'd taken a job as a community college English instructor because I'd failed the Burger Shack's personality test. For some reason, that rejection stands out more than some of the others. As for teaching, the only thing I really knew or cared about was Kafka. So I found a way to pad each expository writing seminar with incongruous stories of desert torture chambers and beautiful chiasms that I would attribute to a variety of writers. I doubted any of my students would check behind me. And if one of them had happened to shout at me, "Wait, Teach," I believe that's from up in the gallery, not up in Michigan. Easy mistake, Teach. I would have been pleased beyond repair. But since that was not so, I stumbled home from post-class nightcaps at the Wincing Dime and played my Wii, my e-reader between my feet so I could glance between games at those same stories I had spoken to my class about, just to see in which ways the booze would change them this time. Rainbow Road, Moo Moo Meadow, Koopa Cape, all the courses on the screen would take on a Kafkan dimension, looping and contorting in twisted harmony with his words. At times I felt that this would be an infinite intertwining, like I was melting into the tracks, or the tracks were melting with me into the Kindle's matrix. Donkey Kong became Red Peter, King Boo, the Hunter Gracchus, Metal Mario, the Tragic K, inching closer and closer to Bowser's castle, boiling inside its fetid heat, but never reaching its gates. And to think that I believed this was the ritual that was keeping me sane. Soon, when morning came, and then came again, I realized it would continue to come in that same way, in the same place, with me doing the same thing. I knew I had to give up teaching in this town. The Wii I left with my roommate. The Kindle had its own dark aura, and I left it to corrode in a box in the basement. I drove back the way I'd come all those years ago. Beside me on the passenger seat was a stack of new books, dozens bought for less than half the price of a new generation console. I'd leave the new generations to the new generation, I thought. Maybe one day, once the spinning stopped, I'd play again. I've got one more. Switching things up. I store it away when company comes over. I will not play it while listening to music. I have a noise machine, so no particular bird's chirp can embed itself in my mind. I close windows and use scent-free wipes. Let the fan blow away any particles that could attempt to settle in my mind. I'm starting from scratch. New mattress on the floor, armless futon, a room with nothing but my books, and even those have their spines turned toward the wall. The downsizing includes as well my gaming. I only play this small banana yellow Switch light in my hand in a self-administered vacuum. Though portable in the extreme, it stays here with me. It cannot, will not, become again what they all have in the past, vectors of memories. I know it's a whole mood right now, a smaller symptom of my depression, but I can hardly step foot in a GameStop without almost bursting into tears. The old games behind their glass cases, the old recollections, the old friends no longer around, the old me. This man too old for video games, as I've been told numerous times by numerous types, family, friends, potential lovers, yet still. There is a neighbor in the apartment I've become quite fond of. I do not place our relationship in a certain category. It simply feels nice to speak with this person. I'm excited when I think I might be seeing them on a certain day. I make sure the Switch is in the drawer, out of sight, out of mind. Then one day, when my neighbor knocks on the door unexpectedly, and I'm too excited to remember to stash the handheld away, and it's lying there right on the futon, and before I can interfere and remove it from this aura of wonderful, this new life, my neighbor snatches it up and lets out a shout. You have one of these? Oh, do you have Mario Kart? All the old games are downloadable too. Oh man, we're gonna have so much fun. So here it is, I think, with a thrilling panic. It has begun. Someday, this good, great thing, the moment's about to occur, will leave me like all the rest. One day, I will write about this too. But for now, I will laugh and feel the jolt down my spine of a new friend making an old game new. We sit, hovering over the tiny screen like kids on Christmas Eve. We play.
Thank you so much, Adam. I wish you could just keep reading. It's such a different experience to hear the author read it than to read it on the page, because I think I have your voice in my head, and then it's just even more extraordinary to be able to experience it knowing the text as well as I do, and knowing, just the directions that it goes and the journey that it takes the reader on. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate being able to hear you say it and read it, and we get to experience it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
What I
for
would love
listening,
to do
everyone.
now, I have a bunch of questions for Adam, as you can imagine, but what I also want to do is make sure that everyone else has a chance to ask questions if you would like to. And so I think in order to keep that as organized as possible in my brain is, if you wouldn't mind, if you do have a question, if you just want to throw a little like an X into the chat, then I could call on you afterwards if you do have a question, or if you want to write your question into the chat for this Zoom, then I can read it for you, or I can offer up a chance for you to read your question to Adam. So feel free at any time, if you have a question you'd like to ask Adam or have me ask him, throw it in the chat, and I want to build some time at the end so that everyone can feel like they get to participate as well if you'd like to. I guess my first question, Adam, is this book serves as such a beautiful, for anyone who lived through the 90s, and I know that there are some on the call right now who did not live through the 90s. For those of us who did, this piece serves, for me particularly, as such a beautiful portal into that time because of the references and because of the video games mentioned. And I'm wondering, what was it about, just in terms of timing and chronology, what was it about this particular decade that felt so right for you as a writer?
I mean, really, it's where I grew up. It's my adolescence. It's, that's the portal that I continue to return to in my writing so often. And so for me, it's just so right for so much. And I'm of course biased, but I feel like even those culturally looking back, historically, it was such an interesting decade and moment when you're having this transition from analog to digital. You're having this kind of ambiguity going on. And I think too, it was the last kind of communal decade, right? I think it was the last time we all had this communal aspect of, whether it be friends coming over because we couldn't play in rooms online, whether it was, getting together in front of the TV and watching a particular show that you had to sit there at a certain time during a certain day of the week. I think all of that is nostalgic for that aspect of it. And for me, growing up during that time, for us who did during the 90s, and then seeing that kind of fade away, not only as we were growing up and just in general fading away from that time in our lives, but also to see culturally the way things began to fragment in the way we consume different parts of media and culture in general. So it's just really a vibrant, interesting time to look back on in general.
I love this concept of sort of the communal aspect that seems to be either lost or in the process of being lost, because I feel like among all of the other concepts and themes that I appreciate about this piece, community is such an interesting one that comes up again and again, particularly about not only the community that this entire collection sort of takes place in locationally, but also the fact that each of these video games can serve as something that you can do individually or something that you can do as a community. And as the mother of two teenage sons, I can see now that video games are much more isolating. It's much more you're playing with someone who lives, 3 towns over, that as sort of like the character in the game, but you're not sitting next to them. Were you aware of just how important video games would play in this piece as not only sort of symbols of themselves, but symbols of things that potentially maybe we've lost as a society, or even lost as we get older and sort of enter into adulthood?
I would not really in terms, I wasn't thinking about it in terms specifically video games when I was, even when I was writing it, I was thinking about in terms of how we anchor ourselves to certain games in general, or certain moments where we're wasting time, right? And where, your parents might come in and say, you need to get off that thing, or your parents might come in and say, you guys gotta come on in, and the whistle calling you in. I think a lot of that is so much of our formative years, and so much of what we look back upon are these moments. and that is what life is, you know. So I think a lot of the collection is about ultimately getting to a point where you can appreciate those moments for what they are, and you know, and using that as something to go forward.
I think what works so beautifully in this collection as well is that it is a collection of flash, that it does offer these sort of doorways that open, and then we get the next doorway that we get to take a peek through, and then the next doorway. And I wonder if you had always intended it to be a collection of flash, or if there were other genres that you had considered when attempting to write this piece.
That's a great question. I did not, and I do not really set out most often to write in a particular form or genre necessarily. It just typically I find myself most enjoying and finding the most satisfaction from this length of story. And so it didn't start out, I'm going to write flash, but I found myself having these, what I found, good endings for these particular pieces, and coming to a close that still left some poetic layering there that still would hopefully resonate, and encoded in a certain way that wasn't, you know, too abstruse or something, and just allowing them to kind of sit there and not force something longer. And that's why I was so thankful that y'all were doing something so interesting with the publishing of it, and looking for something that did not fit within a particular narrative genre necessarily, because that's kind of what I write, you know. And so I did not look at it as a flash, though I love the flash form, and I'm happy it turned out to be, you know, a collection of flash.
I am too. I mean, I think that there's something, like you said, I mean, I've found myself writing a lot of flash lately, and that's not necessarily been my wheelhouse historically. But there's something, I love what you said about, there's something that allows for almost like a poetic layering to happen, where you don't have to take something to its obvious end. You don't have to fill out and evolve and develop every single concept. You're allowed to kind of place it there, which then I think allows the reader to lean in even closer and want to find connections in that small piece, and to sort of see where their fingerprint might be able to be found in that small doorway that we've just found. So I just think it works so beautifully for what you're trying to, what I find you accomplish so well by the end of the piece, which is this sort of arc of discovery and arc of getting to know this narrator so intimately, but in very small patches. I think it just works so beautifully.
Thank you.
Do you think that, let me see if I can phrase this correctly, because this isn't, what do you think? So I threw out the big word, the buildings, Ramon, and it's only because I'm a big book nerd and I wrote my graduate school thesis on buildings, Ramon. So I love to throw that word. All it means is that it's just a journey that a character goes on from start to finish, and they learn something along the way. Basically, I'm dumbing that down. But what do you think is the journey that not only this narrator goes on through the piece, but then conversely, or even similarly, what is the journey that you'd like the reader to go on as they read this collection?
So I feel like that's a tough one, because I do feel like these, as far as the character's journey, their arc, I'm not sure if there is one, honestly. I mean, in terms of there being some kind of realization. Now, I do think the last piece, there is a realization, I would say, of, hey, let's live in the present and recognize what's happening right now is a moment that later on we might appreciate artistically, or just as a beacon for our life. Because I feel like I wrote it in a way that would hopefully feel like how your memories feel, right? Because it's not necessarily, it has a certain chronology, a linear aspect, but a lot of it is non-linear, to where you just kind of dip in and out of a moment. And which is, to me, how, you know, right, how memory works. And so I feel like so often, just like the narrator, how feels like he's cool at a certain time, and then immediately he plays by himself because he's not cool, right? I mean, it's like the notion that at a certain point you think you're something, and you might be, and then at another point in time, further down the line, you're not that at all. And you doubt yourself in so many ways. So there's not necessarily a linear progression of a journey, of an arc, but it is these little episodic moments where you have some kind of epiphanic moment and then it's lost, right? And then it comes back, and then you continue. That's why you continue to return to this portal of your memories and youth and these moments and try to find something and hold it up to the light. There was something here. I felt awful. I was depressed. But look how beautiful this moment was. You know, and that we found that within that. Like I have a piece in there where the narrator in 90s Kid is crying on the floor, and the mother comes in and dances with him because the game's broken, and it'll just let out this bleeding sound, and she turns that into a beautiful moment of them dancing together. So things like that, where you can go back and look and find the beauty in that. That's kind of how I would like the readers to experience it too, is how it feels for them remembering moments in their life. Whatever it has to do with these, what I would like for them to do is for them to trigger their own memory, trigger their own moments that they might need to turn and look at in a different way and find new meaning. And I think I use the word participatory for this collection, and those wonderful comments that I've gotten from people who have read it is very much that these thoughtful, participatory reading that engages it, and it becomes what my writing is all that it can be. But then when a particular person reads it, it becomes so much more because of the way they interacted with it. And that's kind of how I would like to see this as really a participatory piece of memories linked together.
And isn't that lovely? I mean, isn't it lovely to think about finding a text in which we do get to see the vulnerability. We do get to see the times when things weren't necessarily rosy. And then we get to see the upswing that doesn't necessarily last forever. We don't end with the credits rolling and you know, the hillside abloom. We get to sort of experience the ups and downs that make, I think, ultimately, and for me, what this piece really did, it felt so familiar to me in so many ways. And this is, you know, I don't know why I'm getting this personal with it, but like I was able to recognize parts of myself and experiences that I've had, and that you just keep playing, that the number one thing to do is, like, whatever form it manifests, as long as you just keep allowing yourself the joy of playing, and however that you want to define that for yourself, there will be a next game, so to speak, and there will be another chapter. And this doesn't necessarily feel like a closed piece to me. It feels like it could keep evolving. And to me, that's the best kind, where you want to continue kind of telling that story in your head long after you've turned the last page or finished the book. So that I love that was sort of your intention for it, because it definitely resonated with me. So I'm very happy about that. I do have some questions from the chat, which I'm very excited to get to. Patrick, did you want to ask yours yourself, or do you want me to read it for you? Whatever you would prefer.
It's fine. I can read it myself.
Fantastic. Okay, great.
I just tend to get long-winded, so I'll try and keep it to what I type.
You're in good company.
And this is something I haven't asked you before, Adam, about this project when we've met for coffee in books. But how difficult was it to strip down such identity-building moments and relationships into the form of flash prose? Did you find that some moments and relationships were harder than others to articulate in the frame of gaming and growth?
That's a master's in literature question right there. I don't know if I can take that one on.
Question.
Yes, it's a Dr. Kamenish question. So I feel like it's a great question. You know, it's much harder for me, back to the flash aspect of, it's much harder for me to extend something into what some might say a fuller narrative. I mean, that's fine if you want to look at it like that, but it's much harder for me to extend something and say, hey, no. If an editor were to say, hey, put more here, we want to know more about this kid. That's all I got, right? I mean, these moments for me are, I end up taking stuff out, you know, right? I might write a page and a half and I end up taking that half out, or even that whole page out. As far as personal identity, it is tricky when you're playing with what I think anybody can see are some very obvious biographical elements, right? In this collection. And then so kind of removing yourself from that overlay. But then what's also amazing about fiction too is that you can be writing exactly about what happened because that was really interesting, that was fascinating, and then what would have been cool if this had happened, and then so you make that happen, right? And, if you're writing a memoir, you've just got to stick to what actually happened, which might be really boring. So I think having that element of fiction really helps out, particularly even if it's a defense mechanism when you want to maybe take a step back from the actuality, right, of either your identity there or the actuality of something that you want to explore with a fictional narrative as opposed to a more autobiographical narrative. So yeah, I hope that wasn't too mangled an answer for that. But thank you.
That was a great question, Patrick. Thank you. I wish I'd asked it. We have a question, but it's from Adam. And so I'm not sure if Adam has a third arm that he has typed that question into the chat with, but it's great. And it has a compliment at the end. So if anyone wants to claim that question, please feel free.
So I think, and I won't, so I know some people aren't as comfortable speaking. I know a great friend of mine, I think he was using my code
Perfect.
to get in. And
Okay.
so it showed, I didn't realize it would show up as my name.
Okay.
I'm
happy to ask the question.
Yeah.
Where does your inspiration come from to write such articulate and lovely prose, such talent? !
Great question, Adam. I think what's great also about growing up as a 90s kid is we were naive in a way about how wonderful, we were naive. It's a particular type, I should say, of child, which I was privileged enough to be, obviously, was naive to the external, maybe darkness, different things that were going on or would soon occur. And so having the ability to have these moments happen in a really safe environment too, and to look back at these things and be able to explore them, I think is definitely a privilege. Growing up in a different time, a different era, I might not have been prone to look back fondly, or look back and explore these different things. And so I think that's a lot of it. And as far as the form goes, definitely Kafka is a huge inspiration for me. You can spend 10 minutes with me and know that. I'm constantly unashamedly returning to Kafka. And I think it's because for me, it's almost amazing the stuff he was doing, in the early 20th century with these kind of fragmentary what you would call flash prose now. And he didn't care what anybody thought. Like this was his, he cared very much what a lot of people thought, but he didn't care at first when it came to artistry. He was so much about his own way of writing and writing between different layers and writing in these moments of dreams, right? These different kind of moments that you can't really pin down, but you feel a vibe, you understand what's going on, even if you don't understand the particulars of the narrative. So that's very much when I saw that and read that in UNCW professor Dr. Kamenish, her literature class, when I read Kafka the first time, I just was blown away that somebody almost could actually get away with this, and it was amazing that this could be something that we read 100 years later, and it was awesome that it was existed in the world.
I'm so intrigued now because we've learned a bit about sort of your connection to the 90s and having grown up in that decade, and now with Kafka, sort of an added layer on top of this. I'm wondering where you think your quote unquote writing life started. When do you feel like you felt that impulse to take what was going on up here and have it manifest on the page, either fictionally or as nonfiction?
Really, I'm a late bloomer in a lot of ways, and I feel like I was very passive as somebody who creates growing up. I loved reading. I loved just consuming everything I could. I mean, I loved it. But when it came to actually participating in the creation of something, if I wasn't good at it right away, I didn't do it, And so it really took me a long time. When I was in Miss Bennington's English class in high school, and I'm so thankful that she's actually an audience member tonight. But when I was in her class in high school, I wrote a poem, and she encouraged me and said, you're a poet, you're good. And I dismissed it because I didn't realize I dismissed my own talent, right? And then when I realized this is something that I'm interested in doing, regardless of how poorly I might be doing it, there was always in the back of my head, Ms. Bennington's encouragement. And so that kind of kept me going. And then in college, I said, I'll continue to try to pursue this on the side and creatively. And so it wasn't really till college, until right after college, where I really started what I consider seriously writing to beyond assignments, I should say.
Aren't we lucky, those of us who have a Miss Bennington
Yes.
in our past?
Very much
I know
so.
I do. And their voice never leaves you, even if it was one sentence that they said to you that sort of created a fork in the road, and it just never leaves you. So it's so delightful that she's here tonight. Thank you for being here. In your writing life, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've been given as a writer?
Well, we did cover some. I mean, when you talk about advice, I mean, encouragement, is Miss Bennington's encouragement. Dr. Kamenish, her encouragement when I was struggling as a college student, and she told me to just write with some excitement. All these other professors in these classes, they're wanting you to write a certain kind of way that might not be the way that you are meant to write, right? And so having the ability to enjoy writing was, even if you want to be a writer, sometimes you're held back, you're stifled by people who tell you, no, you can't be done that way, right? And I think Ray Bradbury said, why in the world would I sit here and write if it's not joyous, right? So trying to find a joyous way to write and not look at it, regardless of what people say. I don't look at it as sitting down and trying to build a house that I can't stand hammering. So really enjoying that. And, like advice, my mom, just always encouraging me to continue to write regardless. And then I think Toni Morrison, really that's one of the big ones, is Toni Morrison, not that she gave it to me, but she gave it to everyone, is if you haven't seen a book that you would like to read, write your own. So paraphrasing there, something along those lines, right? And it's like, yeah, when I'm writing, I don't have to do it this way because that's the way that we've said is sellable, or what's joyous and interesting to me to write about, and kind of start there. And I think that's what the encouragement and the advice of people, ultimately that's the best and only advice I think people need. I run and I look at 1,000 YouTube videos, people teaching you how to do this and lift your leg like this, and my running just got worse and worse, right? Because I was listening to 18 different ways of doing something, and I was doing them all, and they were just not working. And when I said, what I should be doing probably if I'm a runner is just run, and I think it's the same thing. It's like, find what's fun in doing it, and continue to do it, and lean towards your strengths and the joy you find there.
Do you have certain rituals, or do you have certain kind of creative processes that you use when you're writing?
My coffee is my ritual.
Okay. Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm right there with you.
Coffee and a candle, and my recliner. That's basically, I do like writing in the morning. I do like, I feel like my as far as process goes, so much of my writing, and really 90s kid plays games, is very much a large example of that, where it was just a thought experiment, right? Like you have a tiny thought experiment, like, I wonder, now that I think about it, with this one story that I really enjoyed, that has to do with this particular video game, wonder what different narratives and things that mean something to me I could find if I just started exploring aspects of my gaming life. As a relatively casual 90s kid gamer, which basically means playing all the time, right? I mean, that's a thought experiment that I just tried to tease out, and it ended up becoming something a lot larger than that. But starting there and finding something that you think is interesting to just kind of honestly think about, and then developing that and adding narrative touches that you think will make it a fuller experience.
So that's so fascinating, because I have been asked you this. What was the first piece that you wrote of this collection?
So the very first piece, which went through probably 5 or 6 different permutations in wildly different forms, was the I didn't read it tonight, but it's in the collection. It's called The Ballad of Ghostbusters, and it's been called 100 different things, right?
Yeah.
But I winnowed that down from a longer short story to what I looked at. I called a page piece for an art project I did for a local art gallery, and so it was really a part of these larger pieces that were about youth and looking back in general. And so that was the first piece, The Ballad of Ghostbusters, and then I just loved writing it so much and working with it so much, and that was kind of the jumping off point for all the different stories that ended up appearing in there. Where that and Jackal, I think those two were probably my very first ones that I didn't even see a connection there. I just happened to be writing, and I was like, I'm writing this short story. It happens to feature a video game. It's about family. It's just subconsciously these things that I definitely obsess over, without a doubt. I mean, it's no secret there, but that came about with The Ballad of Ghostbusters.
Oh, that's so interesting. So then when you've finished this marvelous collection, does any of the, and I call it sort of the vapor, does any of the vapor trail off of that piece make its way into a future project, or do you really sort of truncate projects so that they're not similar whatsoever?
I am the opposite of truncation with my I think and again, not even intentionally, which I actually do like that fact. I'm not, to have a whole Faulknerian town and like all these kind of things I can't even imagine doing, but the subconscious works in that way to where I end up having have a collection right now of all these stories based in the town that I started writing about, called Horizon, that was my early 20s. And I just realized I'm writing all these stories that really are taking place in this Horizon universe, because I just used that name. And then I did just finish a book-length nonfiction piece that is very much akin to this piece, only it is nonfiction, and it is about one night when I was 17 and met the late Ron Lester. Me and my buddies went out one night as teenagers, and so it's kind of this Miss Dalloway where it explores one night in our average teenage lives to kind of look at all the different tributaries as it relates to 90s culture and all the stuff that we're going on now. So that's very, very much I like to blend those when I can, because I think it just won't stop. I would have to make it, put up a wall there to keep it from kind of flooding into other projects.
Oh, that's so fantastic. I can't wait to read all of it, every piece of it. Are there things right now that are particularly inspiring to you? I mean, I feel like now that we're, starting to, if not completely kind of breaking out of our COVID cocoons, I feel like there's new inspirations that I'm coming across as a writer, just because I think I'm out and about and hearing things that maybe I wasn't hearing for 2 or 3 years, and we were all kind of isolated. Are there things that you're finding particularly, whether it's books that you're reading or movies you're watching or music you're listening to, that feel like they have kind of the seed of something creative for you?
For me personally, I've gone into, I won't say passive mode. I've just been just enjoying other people's, like the Wednesday series on Netflix that everybody has. I absolutely, I love that. I love that series. I got into that series, just consuming, these things. And like Darren Aronofsky's got a new movie coming out, The Whale.
Yes, I saw it.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Oh, you did?
Oh my gosh, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And I didn't realize it's a play. it was a play originally, and Aronofsky's, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but he directs it as a play. There's one set. People come in and out of that set. And Brandon Fraser is a miracle. He's just a miracle in it. So I can't, it's very hard. It's a difficult movie, but oh my gosh, is it gorgeous. Sorry, that's my tangent.
No, I think that's awesome, because I've been wanting to hear from somebody who actually saw it. So
it's heartbreaking and gorgeous.
I love that you loved it, because I'm so excited to see that, and things that I just love, and I can, especially when it's not writing, I'll get jealous in a heartbeat over reading somebody, you're just doing like, how can somebody do this so
I know.
well?
I know.
But when I look at movies and I look at music, like I can't do those things at all. So it's I can look and just appreciate it. Like Frank Ocean's music, I think, is a companion piece to most anything I write, because I think it's just so lovely and gorgeous the way he gets into the introspection of a person, of a young person, and the different, again, non-conventional turns of phrase, and just beautiful, gorgeous music. So things like that, I just love just consuming, and that's kind of what I've been doing lately, is getting in my cocoon when it comes to writing, and then stepping out and just eating things up that come my way.
Oh, great. Okay, now I need to go watch Wednesday, because it's on my watch list, but I haven't started it yet.
It's good. It's good. You'll finish it on the weekend.
All right. So we unbelievably, we have hit our hour time together, which has just flown by because you're so delightful. I want to give, and if anyone had another question, if they want to throw it in there, we would have time for another one. But I also want to give Joe another chance to sort of chat about the process of getting, purchasing, reading, enjoying Adam's work. So I'm going to pass it off to Joe real quick.
Thanks, Katie, and thank you, Adam, and everybody in the audience. So NiftyLit has sort of an interesting publishing model, and we want work to be accessible and readable. So Adam's work is on our website for reading right now. I'll put a link in the chat in just a minute. The other part of what we do is we sort of straddle the line of being a tech company as well, because we operate in this space that includes publishing writing as non-fungible tokens, which is sort of a foreign language for a lot of people. And it's not really that straightforward. And I'm not here to sort of like try to push that too much. But what it does mean is you can collect Adam's work as a digital collectible. And I'm happy to discuss that further with people if you have any questions. I'll put my email in the chat too, just like even if you want to know about like, what does it mean to be like to publish on blockchain? How is this different from Amazon, e-reader books or Kindle books? I'm happy to have those discussions. But anyway, I'll put in the chat a link to where you can read 90s Kid on our website, and then where you can purchase the digital collectible or the NFT if you want to, and my email address. And then the other neat part about Adam's work is that it also gave us this opportunity to work with a company across the pond in the UK that is also doing on blockchain publishing. And they did another release of 90s Kid in conjunction with an interview with Adam. So I think if you buy their version, you get theirs comes as an e-reader, ours comes as a PDF. But then with theirs, you also get this this interview with Adam. And I think there's just 100 copies of both. So yeah, thank you. And that's my sort of like 60-second advertisement at the end that you all had to suffer through for the joy of being here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you so much to Adam for writing this piece, for sending it to us so that we could be lucky enough to help usher it into the world. Thank you to the Ms. Benningtons of the world, who those of us who are lucky to have one, we are truly, truly fortunate. And I just want to thank you all for being here. You can feel the love and support for Adam on this call. It's palpable. And we just feel very fortunate to be in that community of people who just truly know and appreciate how remarkable he is as a person and a writer. So thank you all for coming. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your 2023. I can't wait to read whatever you have next, Adam. And we will be chatting with you soon. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you guys so much. Y'all are great. Thank you.
Have a good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Adam.
Love you guys.
Thanks. Love you, Adam.